The gas lamps of Boston's North End cast long, flickering shadows down the cobbled streets, the kind that twisted familiar alleyways into gaping mouths and transformed the sturdy brick row houses into hulking, silent giants. It was 1901, and I was 10 years old, skinny as a rake, and convinced the world held more secrets than stars. Most of those secrets, I believed, resided within the grim gray walls of the Murphy residence, a few blocks down from our own tenement, where the air always seemed to hang a little heavier, thick with unspoken grief. My name is Finn O'Connell, and I was just a boy then, but even a boy knows when sorrow has taken root in a family like a stubborn weed, impossible to pull out. The Murphys, they were a name whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale spun by grandmothers over steaming cups of tea, their eyes darting towards the street as if the very mention of the name might conjure ill fortune. Their tragedy wasn't a sudden, shattering blow, but a methodical, cruel unraveling, thread by thread, child by child. It started, or so the whispers went, long before my time, before I could even toddle after my older brothers kicking stray stones down Hanover Street. The first daughter, Ilara, born when Mr. and Mrs. Murphy were still fresh-faced and hopeful, vibrant with the promise of a blossoming family. She was said to be a vision, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of the Atlantic on a clear summer's day. A sickly child from the start, they said, prone to coughing fits and a fever that would come and go like the tide. She died at 7, a week before her 8th birthday, fading away in her bed like a wilting rose, her breath catching and releasing until it simply didn't catch again. The doctors, reputable men with polished spectacles and grave expressions, called it consumption. The neighbors, however, murmured of something far older, something darker, a shadow that clung to the women of the Murphy line. Then came Bridget, a sturdy child full of spirit, with a laugh that could chase away the gloomiest of Boston's winter fogs. She was a whirlwind, all scraped knees and tangled braids, scaling fences and racing the boys through the bustling marketplace. Her parents, scarred by Ilara's passing, watched her with a fierce protective love, a desperation to see her thrive. Bridget made it to 15, a remarkable feat in the eyes of the neighborhood, a flicker of hope in the Murphys' perpetual twilight. It was a stifling August day, the air thick with humidity and the smell of the fish market, when Bridget, usually so spry, complained of a splitting headache. Within hours, a rash bloomed across her skin, angry and red, and her breath grew shallow. The doctor, a different one this time, spoke of scarlet fever, a virulent strain sweeping through the poorer districts. But even as the quarantine sign was nailed to the Murphys' door, the older women of the North End just shook their heads, their lips pursed, their eyes confirming what they already knew. 15. So close, yet still. The curse, they sighed, had claimed another. I remember the funeral for Bridget, though I was only a toddler then. My mother, God rest her soul, had wrapped me in a scratchy woolen blanket and held me close, her own face etched with a silent sorrow that wasn't just for Bridget, but for the Murphys themselves. I recalled the dull thud of the dirt hitting the coffin, a sound that seemed to echo in the very stones of the graveyard, and the almost palpable grief that radiated from the slight figure of Mrs. Murphy, a woman already hollowed out by loss. Mr. Murphy, a towering man with hands calloused from years on the docks, stood beside her, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of profound despair, aged beyond his years. Even as a child, I sensed the quiet horror, the feeling that this wasn't just a tragedy, but a pattern, a relentless drumbeat of doom. It was after Bridget's death that the whispers solidified into a grim certainty. Every daughter, they'd say, their voices barely audible above the clatter of horse-drawn carts. Every single one before they see their 18th year. It was an almost biblical pronouncement, a fate sealed. The Murphys, devout Catholics, frequented Mass, their faces pale and drawn, their prayers, I imagined, less about asking for blessings and more about pleading for mercy, a reprieve from the unseen hand that plucked their female children from their midst. My own family, the O'Connells, we were large and boisterous, a sprawling tangle of boys. My mother, a pragmatic woman with a quick wit and an even quicker temper, always said it was a blessing we had no daughters, given the Murphys' plight. I remember her saying it one evening, stirring a pot of stew, the steam rising in billows around her face. My father, a quiet man who rarely spoke above a murmur, had simply grunted in agreement, his gaze distant, lost in some private reflection on the cruelty of fate. Then came Aine. Pronounced Anya, she was born a few years after Bridget's. Death, a tiny, fragile thing with a shock of dark hair and surprisingly alert blue eyes. My mother, despite her usual reticence regarding the Murphys, sent over a stew, a small gesture of goodwill and shared humanity. I remember seeing Mrs. Murphy cradling Aine in her arms, her face a mixture of profound love and an almost unbearable anxiety, as if she already knew the clock was ticking, that this precious new life was merely on borrowed time. It was a love that was tainted by dread, a joy that felt like a fragile porcelain doll ready to shatter at the slightest tremor. As Aine grew, the neighborhood watched, not with morbid curiosity, but with a collective aching sympathy. Every sniffle, every cough, every slight stumble was observed, discussed, and analyzed. Would she break the curse? Could this child, so seemingly robust in her early years, defy the cruel pattern? Mrs. Murphy, once so outwardly despairing, found a new, quiet strength in Aine's presence. She became fiercely protective, shielding the girl from every perceived danger, from drafts that might bring a chill to rowdy games that might result in a fall. It was a love that bordered on obsession, born of past agony and present terror. Mr. Murphy, too, seemed to revive, his laughter, once a foreign sound, occasionally echoing from their small yard as he played with Aine, tossing her high into the air, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated joy that felt almost blasphemous given the family's history. I was older then, perhaps 7 or 8, when Aine was 4 or 5. We'd sometimes see her playing quietly in their tiny patch of grass behind the house, a doll clutched to her chest. She was a pretty child, delicate features, like a miniature version of her mother before grief had carved its harsh lines into her face. My brothers and I, rambunctious and loud, would occasionally hear her soft laughter, a sound like wind chimes carried on the breeze. It was a sound that always gave me a strange, unsettling feeling. It was lovely, yes, but it felt precarious, like a bubble about to pop, a melody that could suddenly cease. The Murphys never spoke of the curse themselves, not openly. It was a silent agreement in the neighborhood. You didn't ask, you didn't offer platitudes, you just watched and you prayed in your own way for the impossible. They carried their burden with a dignity that was almost unbearable to witness. They were a living monument to sorrow, a constant reminder of the unpredictable cruelties of life in this bustling, unforgiving city. Their small, tightly knit world, once filled with hope and the innocent clamor of children, had been systematically stripped bare, leaving behind only the echoing silence of absence. Boston, for all its grand architecture and burgeoning industries, for all its Irish tenacity and immigrant dreams, was still a place where ancient superstitions clung to the cobblestones like morning mist. The church held sway, but so did the old ways. The belief in things unseen, in fates preordained, in curses that could follow a family like a loyal, malevolent hound. The Murphys were proof of it, a living, breathing testament to the power of such dark beliefs. Their story was woven into the very fabric of the North End, a thread of tragedy in the vibrant tapestry of immigrant life. And as I grew, watching Ein grow alongside me, I felt a growing sense of dread, a profound certainty that the clock was ticking, that this fragile, beautiful life was already marked, a pawn in a game played by forces beyond human comprehension. The year 1901 passed, and Eine turned 7, then 8, then 9. Each birthday was celebrated quietly, a small, whispered victory against the encroaching darkness. But each year also brought her closer to that dreaded age, that invisible boundary beyond which no Murphy daughter had ever passed. The weight of that unspoken expectation, that chilling premonition, hung over the North End, thick and suffocating as the coal smoke that drifted from the chimneys on a cold winter's morning. It was not just the Murphys who held their breath, but all of us, the silent witnesses to a curse that seemed utterly, terrifyingly unbreakable. Ein turned 10. It was a small milestone, unmarked by any public celebration, yet quietly acknowledged by the North End. Each passing year for her felt less like a natural progression and more like a tightrope walk over a chasm, with everyone holding their breath. I was 13 now, more aware of the nuances of our neighborhood, more attuned to the subtle shifts in the air that spoke of unspoken fears. The Murphys' house, once a focus of my youthful curiosity, had become a symbol, a silent testament to the relentless, unseen hand of fate. Mrs. Murphy, bless her fragile heart, seemed to live in a state of perpetual vigilance. Her eyes once, so full of a deep, bottomless sorrow, now held a glint of fierce determination, a maternal defiance against the inevitable. She walked Eine to and from school, even though the schoolhouse was only a few blocks away, and the streets, though bustling, were generally safe. She hovered during play, a silent sentinel, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze following Eine's every movement. The girl, surprisingly, seemed largely unaware of the heavy cloak of anxiety that enveloped her parents. She was a bright, curious child, with a quick smile and a fondness for drawing. I'd sometimes catch glimpses of her through their window, bent over a table, her small hand moving deftly with a crayon or charcoal stick, lost in a world of her own making. My mother, for all her pragmatism, found herself drawn into the Murphys. Quiet drama. She'd occasionally send me over with a freshly baked loaf of soda bread or a small jar of preserves, always with the instruction to tell Mrs. Murphy it was just because, never mentioning the underlying reason we all knew. I was a dutiful messenger, though a nervous one. Stepping into the Murphys' house felt like entering a different realm, one where the air was thinner, the silence deeper. Mr. Murphy, always cordial but distant, would offer a nod and a strained smile. Mrs. Murphy, pale but gracious, would thank me, her voice soft, almost a whisper, as if a louder sound might break the fragile peace she had meticulously constructed around Ein. I remember one particular afternoon when I delivered a pie. Ein was sitting by the window sketching. She looked up as I entered, her blue eyes wide and curious. "Hello, Finn," she said, her voice a sweet, clear bell. She was perhaps 8 at the time, and I, a gawky 11-year-old, felt a sudden awkward flush creep up my neck. I mumbled something about the pie, handing it over to her mother, but my gaze kept drifting back to Ein. She held up her drawing, a surprisingly detailed sketch of a robin perched on a branch. "Look," she offered, her smile genuine. It was good, really good, better than anything I could scrawl. Mrs. Murphy gently took the drawing, her eyes welling up with a familiar, terrifying mix of pride and fear. It was a chilling realization, even for a boy. Every moment of joy, every flicker of hope, was shadowed by the impending doom. As Ein grew older, the children of the North End became subtly aware of her predicament. The bolder boys might whisper, "Cursed," behind their hands, but most of us, especially the girls, treated her with a strange, almost reverent caution. No one wanted to be the one to inadvertently hasten her fate. She wasn't ostracized, but neither was she fully embraced. In the boisterous games that spilled out onto the streets, it was as if an invisible wall surrounded her, built of collective anxiety and the weight of history. She played mostly alone, or with a few carefully chosen, quieter girls from the neighborhood, often in the Murphys' tiny yard, within the watchful gaze of her mother. When Ina turned 12, the tension in the North End became almost unbearable. 12. Bridget had made it to 15. Ilara had died at 7. The curse wasn't precise in its timing, only in its outcome. Each year beyond the last, each day that passed without incident, was a small, agonizing triumph. The church bells seemed to toll with a heavier sound on. Her birthdays and the prayers offered for her at Sunday Mass grew longer, more fervent. Father O'Malley, a stern but compassionate man, would often pause, his gaze sweeping over the Murphys' pew, a silent plea for divine intervention. That winter, a brutal one with snow piled high in the narrow streets and the biting wind whipping. Off the harbor, Ine caught a nasty cold. It started as a sniffle, then a persistent cough that echoed through the quiet streets from their little house. The whispers began anew, quick and sharp as icy shards. "It's starting," some murmured, their faces grim. Others, more hopeful, or perhaps just desperate, insisted it was just a cold, common enough in Boston's harsh winters. But everyone knew, deep in their bones, that for Ine Murphy a simple cold was never just a simple cold. Mrs. Murphy locked her doors, drawing the blinds against the prying eyes of the neighborhood. She didn't send for the doctor immediately, a stark departure from her usual overprotective nature. Perhaps she feared what he might say, dreaded the inevitable pronouncements. My mother, worried, tried to send over chicken broth, but Mrs. Murphy, through a cracked door, politely refused, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and fear. "She's resting," was all she would say. Days turned into a week. The cough grew worse, a rattling in her chest that carried faintly on the wind. Mr. Murphy, usually so reserved, was seen pacing his small front porch, his face ashen, his hands clenching and unclenching. He'd stare out at the street, a silent plea in his eyes, as if searching for an answer in the swirling snow. The North End held its breath. The children stopped their snowball fights, the usual boisterous clamor of the streets replaced by a quiet, watchful stillness. Then, one morning, the cough was gone. The Murphys' blinds were drawn open. Ina, pale but seemingly recovered, was seen looking out of her window, a faint smile on her face. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the neighborhood, almost audible. She had made it through. The cold had passed. The curse, for now, had been defied. But the relief was fleeting, tainted by the knowledge that this was merely a skirmish, not the war. The real battle still lay ahead. I was beginning to understand that the curse wasn't just about death. It was about fear, about the insidious way. It seeped into every corner of a life, twisting joy into anxiety, hope into dread. It was about the slow, agonizing watch, the counting of days, the dread of a milestone, the silent prayer that this time, just this once, the pattern would break. As Ine entered her teen years, the North End adjusted to a new rhythm of life. The younger children continued to play, largely oblivious to the deep-seated fear that permeated the older generations. The men still worked the docks and factories, the women still tended their homes and families, but always, in the background, was the unspoken question, how much longer? Ine herself was growing into a quiet, thoughtful young woman. Her passion for drawing deepened, and she would often be seen with a sketchbook, capturing the essence of the bustling streets, the stern faces of the dock workers, the intricate details of the church facade. Her art was a silent world, a refuge from the unspoken anxieties that surrounded her. It was as if, through her art, she could escape the shadow that pursued her, creating beauty in defiance of the ugliness of her fate. I, too, found myself drawn to the Murphys' quiet existence, not with pity, but with a strange, burgeoning understanding. Their struggle was a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble chaos of my own home, a testament to resilience in the face of insurmountable odds. The curse wasn't just their burden, it was a collective weight on the entire neighborhood, a shared dread that bound us all in a silent, unspoken solidarity. We were all watching, waiting, praying for a miracle that none of us truly believed would come. The year 1901 had long since faded into the past, now 1904. Ine was turning 13 soon, and the calendar pages seemed to flutter by with an alarming speed, bringing her ever closer to that dreaded age of 18, the invisible finish line beyond which no Murphy daughter had ever crossed. The air in the North End, even on the brightest of days, carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of anticipation, the icy breath of a curse that had already claimed two, and seemed intent on claiming another. The North End was a place of rituals. The morning clamor of vendors, the evening quiet of families gathered around tables, the Sunday procession to Mass. And in the Murphy household, there was the ritual of survival. Ina was 14 now, and the air around her thickened with a new kind of dread. It wasn't just the distant, generalized fear of the curse anymore. It was a palpable anxiety, a countdown. 15. The age Bridget had reached, loomed large, a benchmark of despair. I was 17, standing on the cusp of manhood myself, already working part-time on the docks, the salt spray and grit a constant companion. The Murphys' plight, once a child's morbid fascination, had matured into a grim understanding. I saw the lines etched deeper on Mrs. Murphy's face, the perpetual slump in Mr. Murphy's shoulders. They were a pair of living ghosts, haunted by what was to come, clinging to Ine with a desperate, suffocating love. Ina, however, seemed to flourish in her quiet way. Her art had grown more intricate, more expressive. She no longer just sketched robins and street scenes. She drew faces, haunted and beautiful, eyes that seemed to hold untold stories. Sometimes I'd see her sitting on their small stoop, a thick sketchbook in her lap, oblivious to the world around her, lost in the delicate dance of charcoal on paper. She possessed a quiet strength, a serene composure that baffled me. How could she be so calm, so absorbed in her art, with this sword of Damocles hanging over her head? Perhaps it was ignorance, or perhaps it was a profound act of defiance, a way to carve out a space of beauty in a life overshadowed by inevitable tragedy. I often wondered if she knew. Did her parents ever speak of Ilara or Bridget? Did she ever feel the cold breath of the curse on her neck? The neighborhood certainly never spoke of it to her directly. Iterin rent unspoken truth, the elephant in every room, too painful, too terrifying to acknowledge openly. Then came the spring of 1907. Ine was still 14, and the days were lengthening, bringing with them the deceptive promise of warmth and renewal. But for the Murphys, spring brought a different kind of bloom. Ine, usually so slight, began to look gaunt. Her cheeks, once softly rounded, seemed hollowed, and Wes's blue eyes, those striking, intelligent eyes, wide a faint, unsettling sheen. She complained of feeling tired, weariness that sleep couldn't banish. Mrs. Murphy, a woman finely tuned to every tremor in Ine's health, noticed it instantly. The subtle darkening under her eyes, the slightly slower step. She began to brew special teas, concoctions of herbs and roots, convinced that a bit of strength and warmth would chase away whatever vague ailment was clinging to her daughter. But Ine didn't improve. If anything, she seemed to fade, day by day. like a photograph exposed to too much sunlight. The North End held its breath again. The whispers, which had subsided for a time, resurfaced, low and insistent. "It's happening," they muttered, their voices laced with a grim resignation. "It's starting." No one dared to knock on the Murphys' door, not wanting to intrude on what felt like a sacred, painful vigil. My mother sent over more food, left discreetly on their doorstep, a silent offering of sympathy and support. I saw Mr. Murphy more frequently then, his face like a thundercloud, his steps heavy. He'd spend long hours at the pub, a rare indulgence. For such a sober man, drowning his sorrows in ale, his eyes vacant, lost in a despairly ally almost unbearable to witness. He was a man fighting an invisible enemy, Yar losing. One evening, my own father came home from docks with news, relayed in a low, somber tone to my mother. The Murphys had called for Dr. O'Connor, a younger man, more modern in his approach than the older practitioners. He had spent hours inside their house, and when he emerged, his face was as grave as any funeral director's. He spoke of anemia and a weakness of the lungs, but the words, clinical, the precise, felt inadequate, flimsy, against sure weight of the Murphys' history. The doctor prescribed rest, good food, and fresh air. Ina, too weak to argue, remained largely confined to her bed. The blinds were drawn again, plunging the Murphys' house into a perpetual twilight, a quiet sanctuary against the harsh reality of the outside world. The sounds of the street, the cheerful shouts of children, the rumble of carts, faded into a muffled hum. It was as if the world outside had decided to respect their grief, to hold its breath in solidarity. Days stretched direly weeks. Ine was said to be comfortable, at word that offered little comfort to those who knew the Murphys' fate. Mrs. Murphy became a phantom, seen only briefly, her face pinched with exhaustion, her eyes hollowed by lack of sleep and relentless worry. Mr. Murphy, when he wasn't at the pub, sat on their stoop, staring out at nothing, a silent monument to a father's helplessness. I remember one particularly warm afternoon in late May. I was walking past the Murphys' house on my way home from the docks, my clothes stiff with sweat and fish scales. The windows were open, a crack, and a faint sound drifted out, a soft, reedy singing. It was Ine. Her voice, though weak, was surprisingly clear, singing an old Irish lullaby, one my own mother used to hum. It was a mournful, beautiful sound, full, hairy, wistful longing, and then a cough, sharp and sudden, tearing through the fragile melody. The singing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier, more oppressive than before. It was during these weeks that a new thought began to fester in my mind, a desperate, illogical hope. What if G in her chest thried death, but wind.row specific form of illness? Ilara had consumption, Brigid scarlet fever, and now Ine had this weakness UNC lungs. Different afflictions, yes, but all leading SKL same end. What if the curse could be tricked? What if something entirely different, something outside the realm of illness, could break the pattern? It's more boys' desperate reasoning, born of helplessness, Tef yearning for justice. My father, who had always been quiet about the Murphys, surprised me one evening. He sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cuppy of tea, his gaze fixed on ski flickering gaslight. "Finn," he said, his voice unusually soft, "sometimes, lad, the world asks us to bear burdens that make no sense." He didn't offer solutions, or even comfort, just a quiet acknowledgement of the brutal unfairness of it all. Silent a closest he had ever come to admitting the existence of the curse. The summer arrived, bringing with it a deceptive warmth. Ina's 15th birthday, us tea in June. The North End waited, collectively holding its breath. Every passing day felt like a small victory. a defiant nod to the relentless march of fate. But the pallor remained on Ein's face. Okay, Quor's strength did not return. The air around the Murphys' house felt charged, too. Found myself drawn to the Murphys. Quiet existence, not with pity, but with a strange, burgeoning understanding. Their struggle was a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble chaos of my own home, a testament to resilience in the face of insurmountable odds. The curse wasn't just their burden, it was a collective weight on the entire neighborhood, a shared dread that bound us all in a silent, unspoken solidarity. We were all watching, waiting, praying for a miracle that none of us truly believed would come. The year 1901 had long since faded into the past, now 1904. Eine was turning 13 soon, and the calendar pages seemed to flutter by with an alarming speed, bringing her ever closer to that dreaded age of 18, the invisible finish line beyond which no Murphy daughter had ever crossed. The air in the North End, even on the brightest of days, carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of anticipation, the icy breath of a curse that had already claimed two and seemed intent on claiming another. June arrived, a deceptive kiss of warmth on Boston's cheek, and with it, Eine's 15th birthday. There was no cake, no brightly wrapped presents, no cheerful clamor. Just a profound silence that settled over the Murphys' small house, thicker and more suffocating than any fog that rolled in from the harbor. The date marked a chilling anniversary. It was the age Bridget had reached before the scarlet fever claimed her. Every breath Eine took felt like a fragile defiance, every beat of her weakening heart a gamble against the relentless ticking of the curse. I was working full days on the docks by then, my hands rough, my shoulders aching, but my mind was often miles away, drifting towards the quiet despair of the Murphy home. The men at the docks, hardened by a life of labor and loss, would occasionally speak of it in hushed tones, shaking their heads. "Poor souls," they'd say, spitting tobacco juice into the murky water. "Some fates ye can't outrun." It was a fatalism, born of experience, a resignation I couldn't yet stomach. Ein's health continued its cruel decline. Her cough, once intermittent, became a constant hacking rattle that echoed through the thin walls of their tenement. She was confined to her bed almost entirely now, a ghostly figure against the stark white sheets, her skin almost translucent, her delicate features sharpened by illness. Her long, dark hair, once so lustrous, lay limp and dull against the pillow. The spark in her blue eyes, that quiet intelligence I'd seen when she showed me her robin drawing, had dimmed, replaced by a weary, far-away look. Mrs. Murphy was a shadow of her former self, gaunt and hollow-eyed, moving through the house like a wraith. She rarely slept, instead sitting by Ein's bedside, a damp cloth pressed to her daughter's forehead, murmuring prayers and old Gaelic blessings. Mr. Murphy, when he wasn't at work, sat outside, his pipe long since gone cold, his gaze fixed on the setting sun, as if he could somehow appeal to the heavens, demand an explanation, or beg for a reprieve. Their love for Ein was a raw, exposed nerve, excruciating to witness. Dr. O'Connor continued his visits, his face growing grimmer with each call. He spoke of consumption, of lungs ravaged and weakened. He prescribed tonics, bitter concoctions meant to build strength, but they seemed to do little more than sit untouched on Ein's bedside table. The medical advancements of the new century felt impotent against a force that seemed older than time itself. He was a man of science, but even he, I believe, felt the cold touch of something unexplainable in that house. I remember one sweltering July afternoon. The air was heavy, pregnant with the threat of a summer storm, and the usual street noises seemed amplified, grating. My mother sent me to the Murphys with a small jug of fresh milk, hoping it might tempt Ein to drink. Mrs. Murphy answered the door, her eyes red, her lips trembling. She didn't invite me in, simply took the jug with a whispered thanks, her hand brushing mine, cold as a tombstone. But just before she closed the door, I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible sound, like the rustle of dry leaves. It was Aine, gasping for breath, a shallow, desperate struggle for air. The sound chilled me to the bone, a grim confirmation of the inevitable. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of Aine's labored breathing echoed in my mind. I thought of Ilara and Brigid, and the quiet despair that had settled over the Murphy family for decades. It wasn't just illness. It was a systematic dismantling of hope, a cruel, predictable rhythm of loss. A sudden, desperate idea sparked in my mind, a wild, foolish notion born of a boy's frustration and a yearning for a miracle. What if the curse was a physical thing? What if it could be fought? The next day, instead of heading straight for the docks, I took a detour to Mrs. O'Malley, an old Irish woman who lived at the far end of Hanover Street. She was known for her sight, for her knowledge of old remedies and even older superstitions. Her house smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke, and a black cat with watchful green eyes often sat curled by her hearth. My mother, though pious, would sometimes send me to Mrs. O'Malley for a poultice or a charm for a stubborn wart. Mrs. O'Malley, her face a road map of wrinkles, fixed me with her piercing gaze. "Ah, Finn O'Connell," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves. "What troubles bring ye to me on such a fine morning?" I stammered, feeling foolish, but the image of Aine's pale face spurred me on. I spoke of the Murphys, of the curse, of the relentless tragedy. I told her how Aine was fading, just like her sisters. She listened, her eyes never leaving mine, her expression unreadable. When I finished, the silence in her small cottage was profound. Then she sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "The Murphys," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Aye, a dark shadow follows them, lad, a very old shadow." She didn't offer false hope. Instead, she spoke of the land, of ancient agreements broken, of spirits disturbed. It was a vague, unsettling explanation, steeped in folklore I barely understood. But then she spoke of a faint possibility. "Sometimes," she said, her eyes narrowing, "a strong will, a fierce love, can twist the threads of fate. But it takes more than prayers, Finn. It takes an act, a sacrifice, a defiance of the shadow itself." She gave me a small, intricately carved wooden charm, smooth and warm in my hand. "Give this to the girl," she instructed, her voice urgent. "Tell her to keep it close. Tell her it is a piece of the old country, a shield against what seeks to claim her." Her words were cryptic, but her conviction was absolute. I left Mrs. O'Malley's house feeling both foolish and strangely hopeful. A charm. Could a piece of carved wood truly fight a curse that had claimed 2 lives? But the desperate hope outweighed the skepticism. I knew I couldn't just walk up to the Murphys' door and hand it to Mrs. Murphy. It had to be Ina who received it, Aine who would carry it. The next day, an idea formed in my head. I waited until Mr. Murphy left for the docks and Mrs. Murphy went to the market. A rare, brief absence. I knew Aine was likely still in bed, but perhaps, just perhaps, she might be awake enough to hear me. I approached their back door, the one that led to their small, overgrown yard. It was usually unlocked during the day. My heart pounded against, my ribs like a blacksmith's hammer. This felt like a dangerous trespass, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt far worse. I slipped inside, the house quiet, the air heavy with the scent of sickness. I crept down the narrow hallway towards the bedroom where Aine lay. Her door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, peering inside. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. Aine lay still, facing away from me, her breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was gone. "Eine?" I whispered, my voice rough. There was no response. I stepped closer, my hand clutching the wooden charm. "Eine. It's Finn." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she stirred. Her head turned, her eyes fluttering open, unfocused. She looked at me, and for a fleeting moment I saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of the girl she once was. Her lips moved, forming my name, a sound barely louder than a sigh. I knelt by her bed, reaching out my hand, placing the warm, smooth wooden charm into her cold, frail fingers. "Mrs. O'Malley," I whispered. "She says this will help. Keep it close. It's from the old country." Her fingers, surprisingly, closed around the charm. She didn't speak, but her gaze, though weak, seemed to hold a fleeting comprehension. It was a desperate act, a Hail Mary pass against an unyielding opponent, but it was all I could do. And as I crept back out of the house, leaving the charm, in Ina's hand, I felt a tremor of something new. Not hope, not exactly, but a fragile, stubborn defiance against the inevitable. The summer heat pressed down, and the North End waited, holding its breath, for Ine Murphy's 16th birthday. The summer of 1907 hung heavy with dread as Ine approached her 15th birthday, the age Bridget had reached before her death. Ina's health continued to decline, her cough persistent, her body frail. Her parents, gaunt and shadowed, watched. Her fade, their love a raw, exposed nerve. Dr. O'Connor spoke of consumption, his medical words feeling inadequate against the weight of the family's history. Desperate, Finn, sought out Mrs. O'Malley, an old Irish woman known for her sight and knowledge of ancient superstitions. She spoke of a dark shadow and an old agreement broken, but also of a faint possibility, a strong will, a fierce love and an act, a sacrifice, a defiance of the shadow itself. She gave me a small, intricately carved wooden charm, instructing me to give it to Ine, to keep it close as a shield. Taking a desperate chance, I secretly entered the Murphys' house during her parents' brief absence and placed the warm charm into Ine's cold, frail fingers. She stirred, her weak gaze holding a fleeting comprehension. It was a Hail Mary pass against an unyielding opponent. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ine began to recover. The faint lightness returned to Mrs. Murphy's face, and Mr. Murphy began to whistle again. Dr. O'Connor spoke of her remarkable recovery. Ine regained her strength, her quiet vitality returning. The wooden charm remained her quiet companion, a subtle presence hinting at the mysterious forces at play. As Ine turned 17, the North End cautiously dared to hope. The community watched, holding its breath, as she approached her 18th birthday, the age no Murphy daughter had ever reached. On the eve of her 18th birthday in August 1910, the entire North End held a silent vigil. At the stroke of midnight, Ine, tall and slender, stood beside her parents on their stoop, alive and undeniably 18. A profound collective sigh of relief rippled through the neighborhood. The Murphys' curse, that dark, relentless shadow, had been broken. In the years that followed, Ina blossomed. Her art flourished, her canvases capturing the raw beauty and vibrant life of the North End's immigrant community. She became a respected artist, her works found in galleries and private collections, a quiet chronicler of her people. She remained unmarried, dedicating her life to her art and her aging parents, a path that felt like a final defiance of the generational sorrow. Her parents lived out their days in newfound peace, their love now untainted by dread, their lives a testament to enduring hope. The wooden charm remained with Ine, a silent, unspoken element of her survival, a reminder of the inexplicable. The Murphys' story, once a grim tale, became a beloved piece of North End folklore, a narrative of triumph and resilience. It taught me, Finn O'Connell, now a reporter, that even the darkest shadows can be pushed back, and that hope, fiercely held, can paint its own destiny. The Murphy's curse was broken, and their name, once a whisper of fear, became a symphony of hope.